and I am very excited to invite Mr. Yoram Cohen, former director of the Israeli Security Agency, or SHABAK, and from yesterday, the honorary doctor from Bar-Ilan University, which is certainly a remarkable achievement. And his story is very unique, and his contribution to the Israeli Security Agency is very unique as well. And Yoram has many thoughts, and he has been kind enough to share them with you. So the floor is yours, Mr. Yoram Cohen, and that will be followed by a discussion, a panel discussion. Good morning, one and all. I would like to thank the organizers of the conference once again, who have invited me here once again. And I'd like to thank you for coming, and I'd like to thank Amos as well. We are friends, and we share many opinions about the future of Israel in various areas, and particularly security. In the last decade, one might say that Israel and the Palestinians have undergone a dramatic shift from a situation whereby the Palestinians were one uniform system, and since the split between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, we are currently in a situation where we have an isolated entity that functions under a competitive logic. The past logic of the PA, the Palestinian Authority, was that the end of the road would be a political agreement, whereas the Hamas point of view is resistance. But the outcome of both of these collisions between the PA and Hamas, this division, has created a situation whereby there is a conflicting behavior, conflicting conduct, and achievements are being prevented on either side, and the lack of appeasement demonstrates that. One might say that in recent years there has been an erosion in the organizing idea of the Palestinian Authority vis-à-vis Israel, of course. From a situation where there was a horizon in exchange for security, now there is only adverseness, and this is being headed by Abu Mazen. And I would now like to go back to an analysis of light and shade between Israel and the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The lights in Gaza are as follows. First of all, we have a decline in intensification, in terms of military intensification by Hamas, and this is combined with a loss of considerable assets. The tunnels are a part of that, but not only that. Also, Hamas's attempts to direct terror in Judea and Samaria have failed. Peace has been maintained. I have had the privilege of being one of those who led the ceasefire agreement after Operation Protective Edge, and since August 2014, most of the organizations have been keeping peace and do not launch rockets or fire toward Israel. These organizations have actually given us the quietest years in the last 2 decades. But Hamas is also under stress. They're in distress, in fact, because of the money that have been given from different countries, and that certainly harms the financing that they can provide to their own people, and also prevents the rate of intensification that they would have wanted to achieve. There's also a decline in Hamas's public image because their leadership failure has led Hamas, for the first time since they have seized power in the Gaza Strip, to turn to Egypt and to try and reach an agreement with a PA under its conditions, so that the PA will run the civic, perhaps political parts of the Gaza Strip. And another thing that Israel can be happy about is that the operative capabilities of the IDF have been kept in place, as well as its deterrence in various events, including those of the last few days. And finally, and this is very important, and I have mentioned this, we have fewer terrorist attacks, and more importantly, fewer casualties. And these are all the lights that Israel can look at happily and contentedly when it comes to Gaza. But what about the shades, the shadows? Clearly, a ceasefire, as long as it exists and is not limited by time, due to a certain trigger or pressure, may change. And therefore, we're in a situation where there is no stability, or certainty with respect to the near future. Another thing that is worrying Israel is the fact that it is still difficult to find or improve the crucial civil infrastructure for Gaza people: energy, water, sewage, etc. And the third thing is that the economy is still in high percentages. It is not possible for people to make a living. I mean, there's no poverty in Gaza, so to speak, but it's difficult to obtain cash and to buy what you need with it. And if there is no growth engine, then this means that this will continue for many years. And recently, the strikes or the sanctions that the PA has been imposing on Hamas, and that also has some economic and financial implications. In the world of shadows, another thing we should be worried about is that some of Hamas's military leadership is interested and encourages establishing strategic ties with Iran, since they are at a strategic weakness against or vis-a-vis other countries. They are attempting to create a much deeper connection in terms of weapons, financing, training with Iran, so that they can help them fight Israel. As we know, Hamas has been tapping into its distress financially, its lack of achievements in other areas, to create international awareness using the events and the incidents at the fence. They're creating and raising awareness of their situation in order to pressure Israel to change its policy. Of course, in general, after having mentioned this issue of economic stress and pressure, Israel is also worried about an economic situation that has high unemployment and will lead to eruption and rioting in the streets, and will also be felt by us. So if I were to sum up from the Israeli perspective, one might say that even if on the security side we are in a good place vis-a-vis Gaza, despite the violence, and most of our organizations and law enforcement are providing us with a good solution, security-wise, the situation is good. It is better than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. However, one might also say that Hamas, it has gotten to a new low. It is much lower in terms of a strategic distress, which stems from two things. First of all, an economic distress that harms or is in the way of the citizens, but also the leadership, militarily and civilly, and the political distress. Hamas is isolated. It has not been that isolated ever. As for Judea and Samaria and how we analyze that, the lights in terms of Israel, we have and the US administration, the Trump administration, an American administration that does not back up the Palestinian conduct. It is much more attentive to and identifies with Israeli positions. Another thing that is important is that Europe are not going against America's positions. It's certainly not to the extent that the Palestinians or others may have wanted. And the third thing, which is also important, or not, the Middle East countries are busy with what is more important and more urgent for them than the Palestinian theater. Iran, internal security in those countries, radical Islam, and of course the economic dramatic challenges that almost every one of these Middle Eastern countries has. Another light has to do with the maintained coordination, security-wise and civilly, between Israel and the Palestinians, and the Palestinian security apparatuses, effective prevention of terror. And here too, one might say that the number of terror attacks is on the decline and prevention is on the rise. And all in all, the Israeli defense system is providing a good solution to many of the challenges that we are still facing from Judea and Samaria, but the solution is still very good. As for shadows in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority continues to adhere to its positions in all core issues, at least in the discourse that is happening. There is no intention to be more flexible. We want a sovereign state. They want a sovereign state. They want 1967 borders. They want Jerusalem as its capital. Another problem is that the policy in recent years, as I have mentioned, of the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas or Abu Mazen, is a positional policy, and we identify its key characteristics when we see in the UN or the ICC or in BDS or in other places that are trying to weaken Israel with its policy, even hurt Israel in order to bring about a change in policy. Unfortunately, I must mention this, even though it's not the same scale as the other things, but I think that once senior position holders in the Palestinian Authority are still enticing against Israel and its policies and its government, sometimes falsely using lies, I think that is still a huge contribution, a negative one, to the state of affairs. The same is true for paying salaries to prisoners and to families of shaheeds. There is also an economic problem in the West Bank, but less so than in Gaza. Of course, once certain elements minimize some of the international financing that comes to the PA, such as the UNRWA or the bill that was passed in Congress under the name of Taylor Prost, who was killed here, that harms the ability of the PA to pay. I would sum up and say that to this day there is a concern that a trigger, perhaps in holy sites or because of casualties or because of the absence of the ability to divide one's attention, one small crisis could be leveraged into a larger one and bring about catalysts that will undermine security in Judea and Samaria as well. And so if I were to sum up Judea and Samaria and the PA, I would say that they too, the Palestinian Authority as well, are under distress, primarily political isolation, even though it doesn't seem as intense as it is with Hamas. The fact that decisions are being reached in terms of the political agreement without their being consulted over their heads, the fact that they're being pressurized without being spoken to, without there being talks, and of course some steps taken by Abu Mazen and some of his approaches are also to blame. But one might say that the political distress is currently the most dominant, a fear of decisions imposed on them by international elements or international parties, Western ones or international ones, and also the economic situation, but less so. These two challenges provide us with a situation whereby Israel ostensibly is facing these two entities separately because they have separate leadership, separate geographic locations. However, Israel, because of the political and economic distress, is reflecting on Israel. However, I would like to take this opportunity to tell you something as a shift to the next section, which I'll be talking about, which is our dilemma as Israeli citizens. More than 25 years ago, I was still on the ground in my job, and I was actually operating sources. One of them was a political source in the PA, a very intelligent man. And aside from work, we also had conversations personally about peace, about appeasement, about reaching an agreement between Israel and its neighbors in the future. In one of our meetings, myself and the source, he illustrated a kind of, I would say, event that should be thought about. And I think about every so often when I think about the Palestinian issue, regardless of counterterrorism and many important things I have done together with the IDF and various other elements and the Israel Security Agency who take part in this counterterrorism struggle. And he said to me, look, you're here and we're here, but I think that my allegory is that of a prisoner, but not a prisoner's dilemma. You're a prisoner who is tied up to a big metal bolt, who's in a ball and chain, and hates this chain and ball and chain, but cannot get rid of them. And you're so frustrated, you kick us, and sometimes you punch us and you break your fingers and toes. You cannot get rid of us. Every time we sink, the first who will jump into the swamp to save us will be you. Otherwise, we will drag you down along with us. And therefore, this coexistence has to happen because you are the more mature, the more educated, the stronger economically, militarily, and so forth. And so you will have to sort of carry us for years and lead us to safety. Any other solution that will not be reached in agreement by both sides will lead to conflict forever. And from here, I would like to say a few words about the dilemma we have here in Israel and the dilemma of the Israeli citizens. Our dilemma is complex, it is fateful, and any policy adopted by the Israeli government would entail some risk. Those who support remaining in the West Bank and continuing the occupation know that this will be a demographic, political, and ethical, and also security challenge for Israel. Our security challenges will continue under such circumstances, and that will be a danger to losing the significant Jewish majority in Israel. Others who would support a withdrawal from Judea and Samaria as part of an agreement know that such a step would bring about concern about how the Palestinian Authority will conduct itself, the taking over of extreme and radical Islamic elements, and paying a high price by Israeli society. I think that one cannot think that these are not important issues. Both positions have some truth to them, but I think that reaching an agreement with the Palestinians is something that we should all aspire for. We need an arrangement that will considerably minimize our control of the Palestinians and will diminish hostility and hate, but will also entail security arrangements and will also safekeep the Jewish and democratic nature of Israel. However, seeing as there are such huge differences between the views and how each side sees the core elements, due to the stagnation in the political process and because of the PA's inability to provide solution to the security challenges, I think it is not possible to reach a political agreement with the PA leadership in the coming years. And I'm saying in the coming years, and I'm hoping, truly hoping, that it won't be more than just a few years. It is true that in the next few years, the Trump administration, by its own statement, will be offering the two sides a proposal, but we may assume cautiously, without knowing the details of this deal, that the Palestinians will probably reject that too. And therefore, in the absence of a real opportunity to sign an agreement in the next few years, it is of high importance that Israel consolidate or draft for itself its national interests. The Israeli policy should focus on the agreement of the majority rather than all of Israeli citizens in the core issues, one that would safekeep our security and allow us also to pave the way for an agreement. And until these internal processes be put in place, and until the time will come for reaching negotiations and an agreement. My position is that Israel should adopt a proactive approach of refraining from evil and seeking the good. What does refraining from evil mean? It means avoiding the irreversible kind of steps, those that will not enable Israel to continue towards peace in the future. The second thing is to avoid annexing all of Judea and Samaria, and that is in order to refrain from creating one single binational state. The next thing is to keep the holy sites, the ones holy to Islam, and as far as we can do, when it comes to riots and demonstrations and protests, to have the least casualties possible. And the final issue is to refrain from Israeli steps that may perhaps inadvertently injure the Israeli capacity. I don't think that we should build or finance the building of an island opposite the shores of Gaza security-wise. And what is doing good or seeking good? Consolidating an Israeli vision acceptable to the majority of the public on core issues: Jerusalem, borders, refugees, and water, and focusing on building in the settlement blocks. Continuing with our preventive measures against terror, continuing to build the obstacle in Gaza, and also building the fence in Judea and Samaria. It is important to continue with the political coordination with the PA, with the Palestinian Authority, and I'm also not afraid to improve and help the Palestinian security apparatuses in areas where we can help them without this posing a threat currently or in future to the security of Israel, and there are steps that we can take. We must continue with our current policy today to provide as much employment as possible for Palestinians within Israel, and to continue with the freedom of worship in the area of the holy sites. And this may sound extraordinary to some people, but I think that if there is a good atmosphere, if there's a sense of trust and dialogue between the PA leadership and the Israeli one, I think that using just several area C zones can be passed to the PA in such a way that these areas, that in any future agreement, will certainly be part of the Palestinian territory anyway. Israel should push, not just initiate, but even push other countries in the region to go into infrastructure projects in the Palestinian Authority: energy, water, electricity, for the benefit of the Palestinian citizens. And as much as possible in the current atmosphere, security, quiet is one of them, is perhaps some progress with those who are missing. We can help the citizens of Gaza, and we can help them go to Jordan by shuttle. That will minimize the terror threats, and we need to have a good atmosphere, but that can also help. The last thing that I'd like to sum up and conclude with, it will be the solutions, or perhaps alternatives for solutions. Because as I've mentioned, I do not believe that in the next few years this will be possible. I think that the panel will probably analyze it from their own perspective, the panel members will, and that will be dramatic for the Palestinians and the Israelis. But I think it has more to do with their side, but I don't think I'm objective. But also because of the situation in the Middle East, which is unstable, and what we have mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. But without examining new alternatives, or perhaps thinking outside of the box, we're talking about regional solutions, whether to the south or to the east, those that include the Palestinian Authority that is combined, or those that distinguish between the solution for the Gaza Strip and the solution for the Judea and Samaria, perhaps even things that we have not initiated and that have happened on the ground, and we don't have a solution for. The Gaza leadership probably will not change, and there is no one who is willing to occupy them and conquer this area. So perhaps these two separate entities with their separate threats, where we cannot reach an agreement with either one of them in almost any area. Perhaps if we want to make progress, we need to think outside the box. We need to think of new solutions that perhaps have not been considered here in Israel in the past or by others in the past, perhaps by providing incentives or a new perception, a new view in the US administration. We will be able to come up with new regional solutions in order to get out of this complexity, come out of this maze. And I'm saying that because I'm thinking that the absence of a solution, the absence of progress, will stagnate this current situation and will prevent any development, or perhaps even incentivize a development that is tragic to both sides, and it will create hostility, pressure, stress, and perhaps even ongoing fighting. And I think that we should aspire as much as possible to finding creative solutions to preserve security for us and for next generations. Thank you very much.